One day,
before Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. had a dream. Before Rosa Parks kept her seat, Baton Rouge, Louisiana played a vital role in becoming the blueprint for the more publicized boycott in Montgomery, Alabama, which set the stage for desegregation in the Deep South.
We will be sure. We will be sure.
In 1950, the city had ended the independent black-owned buses, requiring all residents to use its monopoly system, which enforced segregated seating. It was racially segregated by Jim Crow law. In practice, black citizens had to sit at the back half of the bus or stand, even if seats in the front white section were empty. African Americans made up 80% of Baton Rouge Bus Company's business. Though they paid full fare, they had to sit or stand at the rear of the bus while the front reserved for whites remained empty. These indignities were familiar to African American Louisianans, but so was a legacy of protest against institutional segregation. January 1953 bus fares were raised 50% from 10 cents to 15 cents. Reverend Theodore Judson Jemison, August 1, 1918 through November 15, 2013, better known as T.J. Jemison, was a Baton Rouge newcomer, but not unknown. His father had been the president of the National Baptist Convention, the largest African American organization in the world. T.J. Jemison arrived in Baton Rouge to take over the state's largest and most prominent black church, Mount Zion First Baptist Church. At the time, Baton Rouge and the surrounding communities were home to numerous voters' leagues and dozens of massive church congregations. As the African American community increasingly called for action against Baton Rouge's bus company, Jemison emerged as an obvious spokesman. He helped lead the first civil rights boycott of segregated seating in public bus service, along with Willis Reed of the United Defense League and black businessman Raymond Scott. His efforts were struck by watching buses pass his church and seeing black people standing in the aisles, not allowed to sit down in seats reserved for whites. He thought that was just out of order and just cruel. By mid-February 1953, Jemison made a bold and unusual appearance before the all-white council. He appealed for the right of black passengers who paid the same fare as whites to sit down when seats were available. 1 month later, with the bus company's support, the City Council unanimously approved Ordinance 222, which changed the segregated seating policy to a model already in place in some southern cities. Riders would fill the bus on a first-come, first-served basis, blacks from the back and whites from the front. In the event if a bus is filled with blacks, they can occupy the front seats, but they cannot sit on a seat next to a white or sit in any seat that is in front of a white. Best of all for the bus company, buses with empty white sections would not have to pass up black riders. Bus drivers immediately received a directive about the new policy, but Ordinance 222 was not enforced for 3 months. The drivers, all white, refused to comply. From March 19th to June 15th, the ordinance is ignored by Baton Rouge bus drivers. By mid-June, black leaders met quietly with city leaders to appeal for action, and after receiving assurance that the law would be enforced, B.J. Stanley, head of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, and Jemison wrote and distributed a flyer advertising black riders of their rights and what to do if bus drivers or police officers challenged them. Still, many African American riders did not know the new policy was on the books. On June 15th, Martha White, a 23-year-old housekeeper exhausted from her daily routine, White's buses was full of standing black passengers and the white seats in the front were available. White sat down behind the driver, explaining that she would get up if a white passenger boarded the bus. The driver ordered her out of her seat. Another African American sat down next to White and urged the other riders to stick together and remain on the bus. The driver threatened to have the woman arrested and summoned police. That morning, Jemison had been cruising downtown streets, ready to test ordinance himself. Seeing the police by the bus, he stopped to find out what was happening. When he informed the police officer that White was within her rights, the bus driver ejected Jiminson from the bus. H.D. Colvin, the bus company manager, then arrived and ordered the driver to obey the city council's ordinance, but the driver refused and Colvin suspended him. The bus drivers' union responded with a walkout. According to Adam Fairclough, a historian of the civil rights movement in Louisiana, the drivers saw it as the African American community wielding political muscle and the white community giving in to that kind of political pressure. After 4 days of striking, union leaders turned to State Attorney General Fred LeBlanc, who overturned the Ordinance 222, ruling that it violated Louisiana's segregation laws. The June 18th decision that ended the drivers' strike galvanized the African American community. Black leaders formed the United Defense League, with Jiminson elected as president. The UDL board of directors included church leaders, officers of the First and Second Ward Voters Leagues, Esso Oil Company employees, and local educators. At a packed meeting called that night, participants vowed to stay out all night, knocking on doors and informing community members to stay off the buses the next day. To spread the word quickly, UDL Secretary Raymond Scott made an announcement that night on WLCS radio, the city's most popular station, ironically a white-owned radio station. Scott appealed to black residents to refuse to ride city buses until the law was changed, and he announced that a carpool service would be available the next morning. By the light of first day, in the wakes of June 20th, the free ride system goes into effect. When city buses approached, black people waiting for rides would turn their backs. African Americans who owned automobiles would pick up anyone needing a ride and take them where they needed to go. The UDL's nightly meetings during the boycott drew thousands of people, and organizers collected thousands of dollars to support the action. Gas station owner Horatio Thompson, the first black man in the South to operate an Esso service station franchise, did his part by selling gas to the boycotters at cost. The first mass meeting was held at Mount Zion Baptist Church. On June 21st, the second mass meeting was held at McKinley High School. By June 22nd, the meetings had grown so large, the meetings were held at Baton Rouge Municipal Stadium, Memorial Stadium. On this hot, sticky night, more than 7,000 African American citizens gathered in. "We don't have to ride the buses. There's nothing wrong with our feet," shouted the crowd. "We'll keep walking." The thousands of people gathered that night were not only ones inspired by the show of solidarity, with headlines like "Bus Boycott Effective" on the pages of the New York Times, and widely circulated African American newspapers like the Chicago Defender and Pittsburgh Courier reported that 20,000 black riders were boldly challenging segregation practices on Louisiana buses. A new mindset was taking shape. Within 4 days, the bus company manager was quoted in the press as saying the boycott was 100% effective. "A continuation of this loss," he said, "will ultimately mean we will have to cease operations." On June 23rd, Jiminson announced he had reached an agreement with the city council, and the boycott was over. June 24th, Ordinance 251 was passed. It was considered a compromise. All people could now sit on the buses. The only exception was that the first 2 seats on any bus were reserved for white people, and the last 2 seats on the bus for black people. People of any color could sit in between. Jiminson's acceptance of the compromise came as a complete surprise, even to UDL board members. Many in the black community felt betrayed by the deal. While the Baton Rouge boycott lasted only 2 weeks, it set protest standards and is growing in recognition as a precedent-setting event in the history of the modern American civil rights movement and economic message. While the Baton Rouge bus boycott does not end segregation as such, it represents a significant victory of black community action against segregation in the Deep South. And it helps inspire the Montgomery bus boycott 2 years later. When the Montgomery boycott begins, the initial demands are for amending segregation in a fashion similar to Baton Rouge's Ordinance 251, though they soon changed the goal to ending all forms of bus segregation. And early in the Montgomery struggle, Dr. King contacts and consults with Reverend Jemison regarding the free ride system, which is then adapted for Montgomery's conditions.
Hands to the heavens, no man, no weapon formed against, yes, glory is destined. Everyday women and men become legends. Sins that go against our skin become blessings. The movement is a rhythm to us. Freedom is like religion to us. Justice is juxtaposition in us. Justice for all, just ain't specific enough. One son died, his spirit is revisiting us. True and living in us. Resistance is us. That's why Rosa sat on the bus. That's why we walk through Ferguson with our hands up.